Welcome you all to the Accounting Padama YouTube channel. So this will be my fourth video over the advanced level accounting paper, and I hope these days you are getting prepared. You are working hard towards your A-level examination. So you are lucky to say that the examiner will be allowing you to use calculators at the examination as well. So it's not confirmed yet, it's still at the discussion level. So let's work out for the examination as we were doing earlier. Okay. So in our last session, in our last video, we discussed about the introduction to management accounting. So there we discussed the difference between management accounting and financial accounting, and what is cost. So what are the classifications of cost, so those things. And today we are going to discuss about the overhead costing, and it will be very important for you because the examiner is very much interested in testing from this area. So easily you will be able to score more than 10 marks from this area. So from our today's session, I'm trying to cover up the introduction to overhead cost and the distribution of overhead cost. Distribution of overhead cost consists of 4 steps, and that 4 steps you have to follow when you are answering to an examination question. Okay. So what do you mean by the overhead cost? So before moving on to the overhead cost, I would like to recap regarding the manufacturing cost. So when we are preparing a manufacturing cost account, what are the components of manufacturing cost or the production cost? So basically there are 2 components, that is prime cost and the overhead cost. So what do you mean by the prime cost? It consists of three cost items. So that's direct material, direct labor, and direct other expenses. So what do you mean by the direct? The term direct, in our last session we discussed direct costs are the costs that can be directly traced out from the product. While looking at the product, while looking at the unit, we will be able to easily trace that cost from the production unit. But when it comes to the overhead cost, we cannot do like that. We cannot easily trace out that cost from the production unit. So let's take an example. So let's take this book. This is just an exercise book. So when manufacturing this exercise book, the cost incurred on the paper is a major component. So we can classify the paper cost as a direct material expense. So the factory rent expense and the factory electricity bill expense. So do you ever think that costs are utilized or are charged over the production of this book? Yes, it is. So it has to be included here over the production cost of this book. So do you ever will be able to directly trace out the factory rent expense or the factory electricity expense from this production unit? No, right? So the electricity expense or the factory rent expense is not incurred based on the level of production. So that's based on the rent agreement, or that's based on the number of kilowatt hours that you incurred, or that's based on the number of kilowatt hours that you consume. So anyway, those expenses are also a part and parcel of your manufacturing cost. So there should be a proper way, there should be an appropriate way to include those indirect expenses, or let's call it as overhead expenses, those overhead expenses over your production cost per unit. So otherwise you won't be able to price your product before selling it. So you have to decide a selling price for your production unit. So then you have to know how much is your production cost per unit. So then you have to have a proper distribution basis, proper allocation basis for the overhead cost over your production units. So that's what we are going to discuss today. And it will be very important to know that these figures, these overhead expenses are based on budget figures. So for a manufacturing company, before manufacturing something, they have to know, they have to predict how much will be their production cost. So based on that only they have to decide their selling price. So the overhead cost is based on budgeted figures. So at the end of the financial year, we can compare the actual expense and the budgeted figures and make several adjustments. So keep in your mind in your calculations, so you have to take the budgeted figures. So in our 4-step process, the first one is collection of overhead cost. So what do you mean by the collection of overhead cost? So that's the collection of all the overhead expenses, identification of all the overhead expenses regardless of the cost center for the organization as a whole. So it may include electricity expenses or the machine depreciation or the factory rent expense and the supervisor charges, those things. So you have to identify all those expenses, all those overhead expenses regardless of the cost unit. So our second step is the allocation of overhead cost. So simply the allocation of overhead cost is the identification of overhead cost for each cost center, right? So let's take an example. Let's say you are manufacturing two products called product A and product B, and for product A you are maintaining a separate factory, and for product B as well you are maintaining a separate factory, and those two factories are made on rent basis, and you are making payments for those two factories based on two rent agreements. And then you will be easily able to identify the rent expense for the production of A units and the rent expense over the production of B units. So that means you will be able easily to identify the overhead expenses over cost centers. And the third step is apportionment of overhead cost. So it's like this. Let's take an example. Let's take a garment factory. So when it comes to a garment factory, they are producing several apparel items. So for that production, several divisions are combined. As an example, planning division, cutting division, and finishing division. So all these divisions are working towards the manufacturing of apparel items, right? And when it comes to the electricity expense, you incur your electricity expense based on the number of kilowatt hours that you consume, not based on the division wise. You are not paying electricity expense based on the division wise. So you won't be able to identify how much of electricity expense over the cutting, over the finishing, over the planning. So you won't be able to trace out likewise. So then anyhow you have to identify a proper way, an appropriate way to allocate your overhead expense over those cost centers. So obviously you won't be able to allocate your production overhead cost over the cost centers using the number of units that you produce. So that's not based on the electricity expense, or the rent expense is not paid over the number of units that you produce, right? So simply the apportionment is the allocation of your overhead expenses over the cost centers using an appropriate basis. So at the second step, at the allocation step, you identified your overhead expenses which can be directly directly allocated towards the cost centers. So at the third step, what we do is we simply allocate our overhead expenses that we incurred as a whole for the manufacturing or the production cost centers. This apportionment is actually composed of two steps. The first one we have already discussed, and the second one is reapportionment of service centers expenses, service centers overhead expenses among the production centers. So it's like this. So when it comes to a manufacturing company, there may be several service centers, so like warehouse and the maintenance centers, like, so those service centers are not dealing with the production, so but they are providing a service towards the manufacturing centers or the production centers. So those service centers are also incurring some expenses, some sort of expenses. So what you have to do is you have to get the total of those service centers expenses, and you have to reallocate those service center expenses among the production centers. So that's the second step. And the last step is absorption of overhead cost. So that's simply the allocation or the absorption of your overhead expenses that you incurred over the total production among your production units, right? So at the end of the third step, you have the total cost, total budgeted cost of production for each cost center. So now you have to allocate those production cost among the production units that you are going to produce. So that's based on a term called overhead absorption rate, right? So that's all about the distribution of overhead cost. So it consists of 4 steps, and it's a simple explanation. So I hope it will be easy for you to understand these 4 steps if you try with a past paper question. So let's take the 2018 past paper question and discuss how we are going to apply those 4 steps when it comes to a past paper question. Right? Okay, so let's take the 2018 A-level second paper question number 2B. I will read the question for you. A fruit drink processing company produces 2 types of fruit drinks. So they are producing 2 production units, that's mango and pineapple. It has a factory consisting of 2 production divisions. So they have 2 production divisions, processing and bottling, and a service division, stores. So the service division is a service center that are providing a service towards those 2 divisions called processing and bottling. The factory and store are located in separate buildings. The factory and stores, so factory is composed of 2 production divisions. So that's the processing and bottling, and service center is separated from the factory. So you have to take it as a point, and let's say whatever the expense incurred over the service center has to be allocated only towards the service center, right? So because the service center is separate from the factory. The budgeted information at the activity level of 50,000 units for a 1-year period is as follows. So they are going to produce 50,000 units. Description. The total expenses are also given, rent for the factory and stores, and the total as well. Indirect wages, electricity charges, machinery insurance, rates for building, charges for security services. So the security services charges are provided with question marks, and the total is given. So let's see. Description. A number of indirect employees, flow area, production machinery cost, cooling machine cost, machine hours for the period, number of security personnel, total kilowatt hours for the period. So those things are provided, and under additional information, production machinery and the cooling machines are depreciated annually at 10% and 8% respectively on a straight line method. So that's simply the depreciation. Total overheads of the store is reapportioned between processing and bottling divisions on the basis of cost of production machinery. Okay, as we discussed on the third step, the reapportionment of the service center should be based on the cost of production machinery. And third one, overheads of the production divisions are absorbed based on machine hours. The following information relates to a bottle of mango drink. Actual time spent, processing division 12 minutes and bottling division 6 minutes. Direct cost, raw material 6 and 40 cents, labor 5 rupees. Non-production variable overhead is 4 rupees. Non-production fixed overhead is 300,000. And the last one, profit margin is 20% of the selling price of each product, right? And you are required, the first one is the overhead analysis sheet showing clearly the basis of apportionment, within brackets including reapportionment of service division overheads. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so this should be your overhead analysis sheet. So the first one should be overhead cost and the apportionment basis, and you have to clearly write down the apportion basis and total. And the production division is composed of, as per this question, the production division is composed of 2 items, that's processing department and the bottling department. And when it comes to service departments, there is one service department that's called stores. So you have to separate the total cost among those 3 divisions, right? So if we take the first one, the rent expense is given as for the whole factory is 180,000 and for the stores is 50,000, altogether 230. Top of the question, they said the factory and the stores are located in separate buildings. Do we need to divide the total factory rent expense among the stores as well? No need. So rent expense over the stores division is clearly mentioned, it's 50,000. So you can directly mention there. And then the factory is composed of 2 departments, that's processing and bottling. So that's 180,000, and you have to allocate that 180,000 among those 2 divisions. But you have to take a clear apportionment basis. So below you are provided with several apportionment bases. So what is the proper basis for the rent expense. So rent is paid based on what? Based on floor area. So for the processing department, the floor area square meters is 12,000 and bottling division, that's 18,000. So you have to allocate the total rent expense based on the floor area pro rata basis. So I will do the first one for you. So the total floor area is 12,000 plus 18,000. So altogether 30,000. We don't need to consider the stores division here. So you have to divide it by 30,000 and multiply it by 12,000 and 18,000 respectively. So the total should be 230. So the first one is rent expense and the apportionment basis is floor area and the total is 230. So out of this 230, 50 goes to stores division and the processing division and bottling division is composed of 72 and 108. So how did you arrive with the 72 and 108? That's based on the apportionment basis. So at the examination, those apportionment bases are given. So you have to use the pro rata basis. And the second one is indirect wages. So indirect wages, factory and the stores are not given and the total is 400,000. And what should be the proper absorption basis or the proper apportionment basis for the indirect wages? So if we check the below, you can see number of indirect employees are given. So processing 10, bottling 15 and stores 15. It's not like the rent expense. So the rent expense, that 50,000, that's stores division is clearly given. But here it's not given. So you have to consider the number of indirect employees as well for the indirect wages computation. So the total is 400,000. It should be apportioned between the three divisions: processing, bottling, and stores. So total of indirect employees are 40. So you have to allocate the indirect wages based on the number of indirect employees. And the third one is electricity charges. So that's 120,000 for the factory, 30,000 for the stores, so altogether 150,000. So here also the stores electricity expense is clearly mentioned, so you don't need to consider that 30,000 for the apportionment. So but the factory is 120, so the factory is composed of two divisions, so you have to allocate that 120 among the two production divisions. So what should be the proper appropriate apportionment basis? So if you check the below, so you can see total kilowatt hours for the period is given. So the processing division 3,000 hours and the bottling division 2,000 kilowatt hours. So using that, so altogether 5,000. Using that, you can allocate the electricity charges for those two divisions. And the fourth one is machine insurance. So machine insurance also stores division is separately given. So that's that we can put directly, and that 90,000 should be divided among the two divisions. So what should be the proper allocation basis, proper apportionment basis? So for machinery insurance, the proper apportionment basis is production machinery cost. And next one is rates for building. So rates as well for the service center 30,000 we have to put itself, and that 90 should be allocated among the two divisions. So what is the proper apportionment basis for rates? So that's rate is paid on what? Rate is paid on flow area. So we can use the flow area as the apportionment basis for rent as well. And next one is charges for security services. So the total is given, that's 360,000. And what should be the proper apportionment basis? So here number of security personnel is given. So for processing 2 employees, bottling 2 employees, and stores 8 employees. So you have to allocate that 306,000 among those employees recruited by the each division. So according to the question, that's all. But if you check the additional information, the first one, production machinery and the pooling machine are depreciated annually at 10% and 8% respectively on a straight line method. So that machinery depreciation expense is also a part of the overhead cost. So you have to allocate it as well. So the production machinery. So the cost of production machinery is 400,000 in the processing department, and it's 200,000 in the bottling department. So production machinery depreciation rate is 10%. So for the processing division, the depreciation should be 40,000, and for bottling division, it should be 200,000 into 10%, that's 20,000. And the cooling machine is located at the stores, so it should be under 8%. And the second additional information, the total overheads of the stores is reapportioned between processing and bottling divisions on the basis of cost of production machinery. So the total of stores division should be reapportioned to those two production divisions based on the given basis. So up to now, that's all for the overhead analysis sheet. So let's get the total for each production departments and service departments. Okay. So the total cost of services is 540, bottling division is 470, and processing is 440. So now the second additional information is the total overheads of the store is reapportioned between processing and bottling divisions on the basis of cost of production machinery. So the total of 540 should be reapportioned between these two departments, these two production divisions based on the cost of production machinery. So the cost of production machinery is for processing 400,000 and bottling 200,000. So altogether 600,000. That should be the pro rata basis. So based on the production machines, so based on the cost of production machines, the service department total cost of 540 divided as 360 and 180 among the two production divisions. So now take the total. So processing division, the total budgeted cost is 800,000, and for the bottling division, the total budget cost is 650,000. So now your overhead analysis sheet part is completed. And your second question is overhead absorption rates for two divisions, processing and bottling. Let's check how we are going to do that. So now we are going to do the fourth step, that's the absorption part. So third additional information, overheads of the production divisions are absorbed based on machine hours. So the absorption rate for the processing division should be calculated based on budgeted overhead cost. So that's 800,000. Should be divided by budgeted machine hours for the processing department. So budgeted machine hours for the processing department is given as processing department is 100,000. So it should be divided by the total of 100,000 machine hours and the total budget overhead cost is 800,000. So the answer is 8 rupees. So that means in the processing department, per 1 hour, per 1 machine hour, the cost is 8 rupees. So if you take the bottling division, so the budgeted overhead cost is 650,000. It should be divided by total budgeted machine hours. So that's 65,000. So that means the answer is 10 rupees. So if we interpret the answer, per 1 machine hour in the bottling department, the total overhead expense is 10 rupees. Okay, so that's all about the overhead cost allocation. So the third question is cost of production per bottle of mango drink. So if we take the if you want to calculate the total cost of production, you have to take the cost of direct expenses, that means the prime cost, as well as the overhead cost as well. So let's check whether they have given the prime cost. So under fourth item, the following information relates to a bottle of mango drink. So actual time spent is given, processing division and the bottling division, and the direct cost, raw material, labor, non-production variable overheads is also given. So direct cost is given, raw material 640, labor 5. So the direct material cost is 640 rupees and direct labor cost is 5 rupees. So altogether your prime cost is 1140 cents. And if you take the overhead cost, processing department, the overhead absorption rate for the processing department per hour is 8 rupees. Machine hours per 1 machine hour 8 rupees. So it says actual time spent, processing division 12 minutes. So this 8 rupees is per 1 hour. So we have to take 12 minutes. How much is the cost for 12 minutes? For that you have to divide it by 60 minutes and multiply it by 12 minutes. So altogether 1.6. And for the bottling division, it says it takes 6 minutes to produce 1 unit. So the per 1 hour it's 10 rupees. So for 6 minutes you have to divide by 60 minutes and multiply it by 6 minutes. So your answer is 1 rupees. So your total manufacturing overhead cost is 260 rupees. So altogether your manufacturing cost is 14 rupees per 1 unit. And the fourth question is budgeted selling price per bottle of mango drink. So when you are deciding the selling price, you have to consider all the expenses, all the manufacturing cost as well as the non-manufacturing cost as well. So now you know your manufacturing cost per one unit is 14 rupees. So let's check whether they are having any other non-manufacturing expenses as well. So if you see, the non-production variable overhead is given, so that's 4 rupees. And fifth one, non-production fixed overhead is 300,000. So the fixed overhead is for the whole production units. So you have to take the fixed overhead cost for 1 unit, right? So for that you have to divide the total fixed overhead cost of 300,000 by actuary level of 50,000. So they are budgeting their fixed overhead expense 300,000 based on the budgeted actuary level. So that's 50,000. So you have to divide 300,000 by 50,000. So the production cost is 14 rupees and the non-production variable overhead is 4 rupees and the fixed overhead per one unit is 6 rupees. So altogether your production cost is 25 rupees. And it says, now we have to adjust for the profit, and it says profit margin is 20% on the selling price of each product. So that's based on the selling price, right? So this is the margin, not the markup. So this is based on the selling price. So the profit is 20% of the selling price. That means 1/5 of the selling price. So if we adjust it for the cost, how much? 1/4 of the cost. So that means 25% of your cost is the profit. So your profit is your cost is 24. 25% out of 24 is 6 rupees. So 6 should be your profit. So your selling price is 30 rupees. Okay, so that's all about the overhead costing part, overhead cost theoretical part, and the 2018 A-level past paper question as well. So practice with the other past paper questions and other model paper questions, and practice will make you perfect. So take this quarantine period as an opportunity for you to utilize much time over the A-level examination and work hard in this period. So it will make good results. So good luck and thank you for watching this video.